Hi everyone, this is Kay. Shannon and I are coming to you from Intersected, and we have a very special episode for you today.
Hi again, this is Shannon. We are doing a crossover episode this time where we're looking at moving forward, addressing Truth and Reconciliation Day, specifically the calls to action, and really getting to understand what those calls to action mean and how we experience working through the calls to action.
Absolutely.
Within the university, within sport. We're going to address a lot of things over the next several episodes. And so we do have a wonderful guest here on Intersected.
I know.
We have Ryanne Logan, who is a Master of Arts student in the Faculty of Applied Health Sciences, Department of Health Sciences specifically. But Ryanne is a wonderful human being, a wonderful person, a wonderful student who occupies the space at Brock, but also identifies in so many other ways. So Ryanne, I'm going to welcome you.
Welcome, Ryanne.
and just turn it over to you for your introduction.
Okay. Thank you for having me. First of all, it's an honor to be the first guest on your podcast. That's so exciting. So my name is Ryanne. I'm a Lenape woman with mixed European heritage, and I come from the Delaware Nation in southwestern Ontario. I'm a part of the Turtle Clan as well. And as Shannon mentioned, I am currently taking my Master's of Applied Health Sciences here at Brock, with a focus on Indigenous women and their experiences with strength and discrimination.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things that we're going to work through in today's episode, and then as I mentioned, this is going to be multiple episodes as we work through the discussion of what the calls to action mean to us here on campus, the sport industry, us as individuals, really just getting a sense of your history with sport, Ryanne. And I know you have multiple layers in terms of your role as athlete, as coach, as someone who is involved in the sports sector, and not only in the university, but in community. So any experience with sport that you'd like to share with us as we get into this idea of what the calls to action mean?
Sure, yeah. So a lot of my life actually has revolved around sport, and that's been a really big part in my upbringing and who I've become, and a lot of my motivation and drive in life. So I started out in various sports when I was really young. I tried a whole bunch of things. I ultimately ended up sticking to hockey. That was kind of my primary sport as I grew up. My brother and my cousins, they all played hockey and lacrosse as well, but I'll get to that in just a second. So I grew up playing hockey predominantly, and so that was a big part of my life. I did dance as well for, I think, 9 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I was in a number of things, and then ultimately it came to the point where I had to decide what I wanted to focus on, and that ultimately became hockey. And from there, at this point, I knew about lacrosse through my brother and my cousins, and I had always wanted to play, but there was no girls or women's teams around the area for me. And this was at a time in my life when my mom wasn't really willing to let me play with the boys.
Crossover,
just because of the physicality of the sport.
Absolutely.
And that kind of thing. So then when I turned, I think 13 or 14, I was technically the age that I could AP up to the older women's team. And so that was my in for being able to play, kind of facilitating me into the sport, which I had been asking to play for years at this point. Just always watching my brother, watching my cousins. They were very competitive in the sport, and it was something I always loved.
So how did that feel, if I can just ask, like, not being able to play with them, but watching them, and then the transition to getting your opportunity?
It was exciting, and honestly, it was a lot of, I would say, working on my mom, and I had a lot of support, thankfully, from my mom's sister, so my aunt, her son, so my cousin.
Yep.
played lacrosse, and he was extremely skilled. Like, he was a very good player. He played both box and field. And Shane, my younger brother, he started playing lacrosse when he was about 3 or 4. So this had been in my life from a very young age.
Yeah.
So not only was I wanting to play, but I was also surrounded by it. That was kind of our summer, was tournaments, camping, things like that, to kind of keep up with lacrosse for my brother and watching my cousins.
For sure.
Like
Longing.
yes. And like at this point, I even had a lacrosse stick. Like I would get, like, I went to my brother's provincials and I got myself a stick. In like preparation that I knew I was going to get there at some point.
Yeah.
And so when I finally did reach that age, my mom was still hesitant just because of the physicality. Like, at this point, I'm older. I'm 2.5, 3 years older than my brother, but at his young age, they were already fighting in that league. So imagine like taking a step up into an intermediate group. So she was a little hesitant, but my aunt actually was a really big part in prompting my mom to like let me try it, how like supporting me, advocating for
challenging
me.
stereotypes.
Yes, like advocating for me, like telling my mom that I've like grown up around it. It's an amazing sport, things like that. And so finally, my mom let me register the following year. And so when I was, I think it would have been the summer between 13 and 14 that I finally started playing, and that was great. And I haven't stopped since.
See, so amazing.
And this is like drawing into what we're talking about with the calls to action. And I'm going to read one of the calls to action just as a sort of a link, because I'm hearing so many elements of what you're talking about here, Ryan, in your experience in these calls. So call to action 89. We call upon the federal government to amend the Physical Activity in Sport Act to support reconciliation by ensuring that policies to promote physical activity as a fundamental element of health and well-being, reducing barriers to sports participation, so we're hearing some barriers in your story, increasing the pursuit of excellence and building capacity in the Canadian sports system, that they're inclusive of Aboriginal peoples. So thinking about what I'm hearing too is this idea of community is built into your experience. It's not just the act of sport, but it's being involved in community, connecting with family. This idea that there are certain sports that might be perceived across cultures as okay for women and girls to participate in, but let's move towards breaking down some of those barriers. And there was sort of your mom as like an individual who's said, you know what, you're not going to be involved in, but were there any other barriers outside of your mom that stopped you from being involved? Like the types of programs that were available to you?
Or lack thereof.
The lack thereof, what you didn't see around you? Because yes, your mom's saying no, but she's also saying no because there wasn't anything appropriate. Like for, so you're saying physicality, you didn't want to be involved in that, but was there anything else available at that time, those types of barriers in that space?
Yeah, no, I think two things from what you just said, actually. So first, I would say a major barrier to me playing or starting at the age that I did was that there wasn't these teams available at that time, which is honestly great because now I go home and these teams are available for the younger girls and the younger generations to play, and it's so great to see. But at that time, that wasn't a thing.
Absolutely.
So you had to be a certain age if you wanted to play for the girls division, that kind of thing. And even so, I was joining at the ripe age of 13 or 14. And because of the level that I had to play at to play on a girls team, because of the lack of women's teams available, I was playing with like 22-year-olds. And I was like a very small
statured
girl, yeah. Joining this league of women who had been playing for a lot longer than I had. So there was that kind of barrier as well, feeling like I had to catch up and get to their point while also at the same time trying to learn the game for myself and get into it. So that was one. And kind of on like a little bit of a separate point, that aspect of community that you talked about, that was one of the major reasons that I actually chose lacrosse as my primary sport rather than hockey. Like I grew up playing very competitive hockey. That was my thing. I still love hockey so much. Like, I still kind of dabble here and there and play where I can. But it was coming to lacrosse and having that sisterhood and that actual family, something that I had never experienced before on other teams. And not to knock these other teams, but there's something different about the game of lacrosse for me personally that brought that community aspect. And it felt more than like a team. It felt like having a family and like a sisterhood. And we were all there for each other and not just for ourselves, which was something, again, that I just hadn't experienced, and that was something that really drew me in. And even like that very first team that I played on, I still can talk to those ladies, and like we still catch up here and there. Like those are like my sisters now, which is, again, something I haven't experienced in other sports, which is kind of cool.
That sounds so profound.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Yeah.
And I think it ties it. We talk a lot on the larger podcast around what's happening right now in the sports system. And one of the critiques I'll put out there is that sense of community has been missing from certain sport. And you kind of acknowledge this in what you just said. But rebuilding our sports system, go back to the roots of why do we want to engage in physical activity in sport? We feel like a community. We want to be physically active. We want to have connections with people. So if we're talking to some of these sport organizations later this week, is to say, how do we build that into all of our programs? If we see it in lacrosse and your own experience, how do we make that possible? As part of what I'm seeing in these calls to action is to think about culture, to think about community, and those two things aren't separate from sport. And I think one of my criticisms of our larger sport industry is that we've missed that. Everything seems to be about just the competition and win at all costs, and I'm really generalizing, but there is that piece. And then now we're missing a whole aspect that's really beautiful about sport. And I think we need to push a little bit more in terms of what that looks like from our sport organizations to bring that back a little bit.
I think that's a really good point. And for me as a Black woman, thinking about these calls to action, just to pull back for a second and focus on number 87, which says briefly, we call upon all levels of government in collaboration with Aboriginal peoples, Sports Hall of Fame, and other relevant organizations to provide public education that tells the national story of Aboriginal athletes in history. Until I started teaching the Diversity and Inclusion in Sport Organizations course, I didn't even know the history of lacrosse and that it was deeply embedded and rooted in indigeneity. I didn't know that. So I learned that along with the students. So even starting there to say, like, there's all these beautiful things you're talking about that come out of the sport and out of the community, the space of community. But the tip of the iceberg is a lot of people don't even know where it's rooted, so that we can begin to appreciate it for what it is and where it's rooted. So that part actually blew my mind when I realized that, along with the students. And I owned it to them, because there's a vulnerability that is important.
And I think that's important when we present these podcasts, and I think one of the audiences will be students, is to just say the calls to action are there. One, do you know them? And then also, how do we actually authentically engage in answering some of the calls? And so being truthful in saying, well, I didn't even know this call existed. We're being vulnerable in that space, but that's a step to then say, now I've acknowledged that, what do I do about it?
Absolutely.
I think that's a huge step.
It's a huge first step in appreciating what Indigenous culture contributes to sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Uniquely, in a way that I don't think we wholly and fully celebrate.
Yeah, no, agreed. So Ryan, we'll turn back to you to we've just sort of emphasized the cultural significance of sport and what sport means to different Indigenous cultures, different families, and what it means to your specific culture, but also your family.
Yeah, so I also want to preface and say that what I'm saying is coming from my own experience, and I can't speak on behalf of every single Indigenous culture or person.
Fair.
And that's just something I wanted to get out of the way.
Thank you.
And just kind of lay out. But in my experience, or like from my perspective, I would say the relationship between culture and sport in this aspect, I guess lacrosse specifically right now, they kind of go hand in hand. And so for me personally, as an Indigenous person, as a First Nations woman, lacrosse is more than just a sport. It's known as the medicine game in some Indigenous cultures. And that's because the sport is not just something to do or something to play, but it's healing, and it's providing a connection to our Creator, and providing a space where we can go and do these things for the people who have come before us, so like our ancestors. And for me specifically, I lost my dad at the age of 10, and that was a direct result of intergenerational trauma due to the Indian residential school system. That happened, and that has been a really big driving force for me, not only in sport, but in academics and in my entire life, because not only, like, am I...
You know, the interesting thing I'm learning in hearing you talk about this is when you talk about your sport, you don't talk about it as a singular, a one of. There's a sense of, like you said, the generations that came before you, the generations that are being inspired after you. Like, it's one big ecosystem that's never singular. And I like that. I'm drawn to that.
Yeah, I think that's personally, like, I think that's the way that it should be. I don't go out there and try to do things for me in terms of stepping onto the floor. Like, when I'm preparing for my game, I try and put myself in a positive headspace that allows me to think about why I'm here. Why am I playing? Like, what is this for? This isn't just to go out and win. I'm not just going out to try and hit people or lay people out, but I'm trying to go in with a good mind and remembering why I'm doing this, and that there was so many people that came before me that didn't have the opportunity to do this or to play these, like, at this level, that kind of thing. So I try and center myself before I play and while I'm playing, and try and give myself that good medicine. Like, I play, I braid my hair before I play lacrosse, and that's, like, I don't know if you've heard that, like, a braid kind of represents, to me personally, again, a connection to Creator. And so that's representative for me. And so that's not just a hairstyle for me. While I'm doing my braid before my game, I'm thinking about the good, like, I'm trying to bring that good medicine in and think, okay, like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm doing this for my dad, for my ancestors, for my family, for the girls sitting in the room beside me. So it's not just about me, but it's like that driving force behind not only being here and why I'm doing it, but just having the opportunity to be able to do it, and trying to keep that in my mind as I go and step onto the floor.
You articulate that so clearly and concisely, and I am receiving every bit of that message. And the word that's coming to mind it's mindfulness. There's a mindfulness that you carry with you throughout the entire experience within your sport, that generally speaking is not threaded, I think, in a relevant way in sports in general. Once again, generalizing, but such an important piece you articulate here.
And adding to that, and what you're saying is, like, I can attest to that. Like, even personally, there has been times where I've kind of lost my way or lost sight, and I'll notice it while I'm playing. Like, something doesn't feel the same. Like, I'm there, my focus isn't in the right spot, and I can tell. And so then it takes me kind of stepping back to think, like, what's going on? Like, I was focusing too much on the competitiveness or the winning or things like that, like letting things kind of get into my head that blurred my vision. And those are actually the times when I've found that I've struggled with playing the game, and that I've kind of, like, not been fully in it. It's been those times when I've had to take a step back and think about, why am I not having, not fun, because I'm still having fun, but why am I not having the same experience? Like, something's missing. and then thinking about it and kind of having to return back to my roots and say, okay, like I need to reset. So I think that's something that we see a lot in sport in general, is like kind of just that losing sight or vision of what we really want out of the sport, and like kind of focusing more on that competitive aspect, or that just winning and being the best, that kind of thing, which I don't think well, obviously in some capacity, but shouldn't be the only focus in sport.
Yeah, it comes back to, we all want to win. When we're competitive, we all want to win. But if that becomes the sole purpose, that's when we sort of lose our way. And the one thing, coming back to sort of keeping a thread through what Kay was saying, and then back to what you were saying, Ryan, is starting with the call 87, just understanding Indigenous histories. So to your point, Ryan, where there's not a monolith, a bunch of different experiences. As sport organizations, as people that, like myself, who I work with sport organizations, is actually doing the work to understand the healing power, the medicine that you're speaking of, and what that means to people, so that a coach or a programmer can give someone the space to say, okay, if braiding is part of what you need to do, and maybe that's something that you want to do in the locker room 45 minutes before a match, is recognizing that for many different people, these types of experiences are part of that I'm going to speak for you, but it sounds like you connect with your sport. Like it's like this visceral connection, and we don't create spaces for that, I don't think, for the most part in our sport organizations. And maybe that's a good place to weave 87 into 89 in terms of the calls, is to say, let's learn a little bit so that we at least have a respect for where people are, meeting them where they are.
Like more of an embodied experience, right? Is what you're sort of describing.
Wow. Yeah, that's
something to think about, huh?
I know, my brain is just spinning.
Me too.
In terms of and just thinking about what organizations could or might be even doing, and they don't even know. Like this is where it's also, we know there's a lot of people doing good work out there and trying to meet these calls, but it's like, what can we acknowledge as like allowing for good spaces for athletes, young athletes in particular, right? Is, yes, we all want to be competitive. Yes, we all want to win, but how do you allow someone the space to connect with their sport in a really meaningful way?
And even deconstruct some of the systems in place, because, again, what you described is if there isn't a complete harmony with everything going on around you, at this point as an athlete, you can sense and perceive that. And you have the skills to get yourself back to a place of balance and harmony. But now let's think of sport organizations. When athletes are going on skids, they're not doing well. Do we ever stop and say, okay, let's engage with you mindfully? Yeah. Where's the break in your harmony basket? Yeah. We don't address athletes in that way. We say, go to the gym, work out more, get stronger, right? But there's more to it that I'm understanding and really appreciating. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Thank you guys so much.
And one of the things, Ryan, you kind of alluded to in terms of, we talk about this, and you seem to have had a positive experience with sport, but acknowledging that not everyone's experience with sport is positive, and what that might look like in terms of how we embrace experiences and acknowledge that some are negative, and then how do we move forward with addressing that in the sport industry? I think that's the big question, is recognizing that as we move forward.
And also negotiating that within yourself as an athlete, that I'm having a great time, but there are experiences within that may not be so great, although the overall is, right? So how do we negotiate all that?
For me personally, I would say, just like based off some of the things that you have both been saying, it's prompting me to think, and there are definitely times where it hasn't been the best. Like, I choose, I think, to focus on the positive, especially in the context of lacrosse specifically as a sport, because of my respect for it. But there are some definite times where there has been negative experiences where we've dealt with things as a team, experiences personally, as we were talking about the leaders, like coaching, things like that. So having, like, the best coaches that I ever had were people who prioritized me as a person first, and not what you were saying, Kay, and just that go to the gym, eat right, making sure that you're at your top physical performance
As an
rather
athlete
than
versus as a person.
yes, in general. So there are like definitely negative things that I've experienced both personally and with my team in general that hurt, definitely. Like, they were painful experiences, and to experience those in a sport that stems from Indigenous culture and a gift from the creator in that medicine, it's very harmful sometimes, but also to have that team with you to get through that, and that support system, I think, is a big part of that. Yeah.
And allowing that space, right? Allowing space for teams to work through things. I think that's an interesting way to move forward in terms of giving a bit more power back to a team of athletes, particularly when you're looking at, and I'm not sure if your experience was here at the university, but thinking about a university team, you're young women, so adults, and you're able to negotiate some of these things as a team, and that's a really strong bond that I'm hearing around an important sport for you personally. And how do you foster that? I think that's a big piece of what we're maybe lacking in in the industry is, and I'm categorizing sport as broad, so we're thinking about in and outside of university, but there's so much put on a coach in terms of leadership and hierarchy. And my understanding of Indigenous cultures is that hierarchy is broken down. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes.
And so, so if I think of these calls to action are very somewhat formulaic in terms of, but that seems to bridge across all of them. As if we are thinking about Indigenous cultures, is how do we push that hierarchy that exists currently in sport? And your example makes me think of how awesome is it that you were able to navigate that as a team, and can't we embrace those things a bit more?
Fair. I wanted to ask you a question. How do the experiences you've had as an athlete, good and otherwise, inform how you coach?
That is a great question. I would say they go hand in hand again. I think a lot of my coaching direction comes from the ways that I've been coached and the things that I've experienced as a player.
Absolutely.
So I'd say I grew up, I play both box and field. I don't know if I mentioned that, but playing box, that's where my real kind of connection to that community aspect in the game came from. That was where I started with lacrosse. And I have some really, really great coaches that to thank for that experience during my younger years in lacrosse and playing box growing up at my center.
Can I ask, I don't even know what box and field means.
Oh, yes, sorry.
And I'm thinking maybe there are some people like me.
No, you're right. So my apologies.
No, all
There's
good.
box lacrosse and field lacrosse. So there are two forms of lacrosse, I would say, but theoretically, I'd say you could look at them as two separate sports.
Interesting.
Field lacrosse, is probably the more known version of lacrosse. That's what is played, at the university level in the United States, things like that. Box lacrosse is a little bit more central to Canada right now, but has been expanding.
Interesting.
There was the first Women's World Championships last year in Utica, which was cool.
Okay.
Yeah, so big moves are being had in box lacrosse, but it's lesser known right now, but becoming bigger.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question then.
So box lacrosse just generally is played in a hockey arena. There's 5 players for each team. You're fully equipped. There's full contact. For women's field specifically, because that differs from men's field lacrosse.
Okay.
Women's field is played kind of on a soccer pitch or field.
That's the one I know.
Yeah. Okay. So then there's 10 players, limited equipment. There's not too much contact. There's limited contact if you do it a specific way. But those, they differ greatly. I would suggest if you're listening to maybe check them out, because I'm not sure if my
For sure.
explanation was the best. But men and women's field lacrosse, I can't claim to be an expert on field lacrosse. I only started playing when I started at Brock, so about 4 or 5 years ago. But for men's and men's kind of mimics more of the box lacrosse aspect in terms of there's full contact, they wear equipment, helmets, that kind of thing, but it still takes place on a field with the same amount of players, so around 10, I think, including goalie. And women's, as I said, there's limited equipment, so pretty much just your stick, cleats. Some people wear goggles, some don't, and mouth guard. And limited contact. And there's different rules. So I don't even know specifically the rules of the men's game to be able to go into that. But I know there are some differences definitely between the two.
We are addressing the calls to action specific to sport, but we recognize that the calls to action cross over and they're meant to be all inclusive. And thinking about how, one, sport is connected to education here, intercollegiate athletics in the US, here collegiate athletics, but also just the way in which education is intertwined with sport within our call to reconcile and truth and reconciliation. And you alluded to it previously with your story, but can you get into or tell us more about the experience you had understanding the loss of your father at an early age, and then how you've used that as motivation and inspiration and your connection with him? We come back to connection. That connection piece is huge. And what that looks like for you through sport and education here at Brock.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I also think it's so important for us to acknowledge that, we're doing this, having this conversation, but it really does touch on some really touchy subject matter. And in the Canadian landscape, we kind of talk about it like it is something that happened. It is something that happened. But I think just important to pause and give it the moment and full respect that you deserve for standing in and bringing that story to bear in terms of us understanding all of the layers that you're willing to share with us, because it's more than just a story. It's a huge atrocity. And so I needed to say that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you talked about healing, like this idea of healing and how important that is.
Yeah.
That 100%, you just said it so well. So I guess the other piece is thank you for sharing and us recognizing that this is beyond this conversation.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the healing piece of sport and healing for you and healing for the people around you and your community, generations behind you and generations ahead of you.
So to start, I would say just getting into it, as kind of mirroring what you were saying, Kay, just about how this is kind of touchy, and I do want to give a little bit of a warning to anyone listening that this could be difficult to listen to. But at the same time, I also feel like it's very important, because a lot of times we go through the world or the context that we're in and we don't kind of really give that consideration to what others are going through or what they've experienced, and kind of just placing our emphasis and importance on what's being shown and not the things that perhaps people don't talk about but that are happening in their lives and things like
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. So to start, I would say just coming back to the story of my dad and losing him. I would say at that time, so I was 10 when that happened. It was 2011. Actually, it was 14 years ago, 2 days ago. Which, yeah, so it's been I've been working through this, and especially working up to this discussion and how I wanted to approach it and things like that. But I think it's really important, and it's a way for me personally to honor my dad and to keep remembering him and reminding myself of why I'm doing this and things that have happened in my life. So I was 10 when that happened, and at the time I didn't understand what was happening, definitely. But as I've grown, I've come to understand, and I've been kind of put into the space where I have to understand. And so I don't know how to start with it, but essentially as I mentioned, my dad's death was the direct result of intergenerational trauma due to the Indian residential school here in Canada. And that was, I have grandparents who attended the residential school system. And so that, I would say, that impacted my father's life in a way that wasn't fair to him. And this happened to a lot of people where it's just their parents or grandparents attended the residential school system and they came back so disconnected, so hurt, and just not with the ability to like fully care for others and like take care of their families and show that kind of love that a parent should be able to do. And so I know that my dad experienced that when he was younger. And so that, I guess, continues that intergenerational aspect of, despite not having actually attended residential schools, he was a victim in that he experienced the backlash and the trauma of that a little bit further down. And he actually attended Indian day schools, which were a little bit different that I don't think everyone fully knows about. But following the IRS, or the Indian residential school system, there was also day schools. So kind of with a similar mantra, but just like on the reserve during the day, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that played a large factor in my dad's upbringing and the way that his family was around or wasn't around. He lost his father at a young age as well. And so that was another factor that played into all of this. And so my dad ended up becoming an alcoholic. And I'm forever grateful that he wasn't an alcoholic in the sense that you would stereotypically think of when you think of that. My mom was a large part in ensuring that that wasn't around me or my brother growing up. So they were together growing up, and then when I was young, they split up due to this, for the most part.
Yeah.
And so then I spent time both with my mom living in town in this small town that I grew up in, and spending time also on the reserve with my dad at his house. And so I had that connection, and I was a daddy's girl, definitely. Through and through, I was a daddy's girl. And so yeah, I just want to emphasize that it wasn't this wholly negative experience growing up. Like, my dad was there. I was, like, he was my favorite person. Like, we spent time together. He took us to do things, stuff like that.
He was a great dad, because both things can be true at the same time. Mm-hmm. And you're literally breaking stereotypes as you're speaking, yeah? Mm-hmm. Please keep going.
Yeah, so he was a great man. And so that I want to put out there first, because I don't want these negative annotations or stereotypes kind of floating around, because that is true.
Yeah.
And so then when I started to get older, he got sick. Like, he got sick, and so he went to the hospital, that kind of thing. And he had surgery. I was 10 at this point, so I don't know, I didn't know the specifics, but I just knew that, Dad was having surgery, that kind of thing. And so after surgery, I thought, surgery cures everything. Like, of course, it would be better.
Child, yeah.
And so that was a factor. And so he came home, and then I don't actually know the timeline. A lot of it is very blurry for me. Yeah. But eventually he ended up getting sick again, and so then it was spending a lot of time in the hospital and trying to figure out what was happening. And from there, that's when we just kind of started to lose him. I spent like days and nights in the hospital for
days
months.
and days and
Yes.
nights and nights. Yeah.
For months, and like just spending my time going to visit my dad, not understanding what was happening or why this was happening at this point, and feeling a whole lot of emotions about it. Assuming that he was going to be okay, but then he just wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, so we lost him, and that was a really, really hard time, naturally, for my family. My little brother and my mom, the three of us, we were, I don't have words really, but it was a really, really hard time for our family. And so as I grew up, I was kind of put into this weird space of having my Indigenous identity, but also feeling like I lost a part of it with my connection to my dad, and having that there to support me and lead me, because my mom is non-Indigenous. So that played a big part in me wondering about my identity and who I was, like a lot of things like that growing up. And so as I started to come into the academic space and I came to university, I was the first member of my family to come to university and to graduate with a degree from a university. And so that, all of that stems from my experiences when I was younger, I would say. And now I don't only have to try and like make my family proud in general, but now I have like, I felt like I had this purpose, and I still feel this, like I have this purpose to do something, not only for my dad, but for anyone else who didn't have the experiences and the facilities, I guess, to be able to get to a point where I'm at right now. And so being able to recognize that privilege and having that is a really big motivating drive for me, because not only do I have myself, I'm like, obviously I care about myself and I want to make myself proud, but majority of it is because of the people who have come in front of me and doing that for them, like not only for my Indigenous family, but my non-Indigenous family. Like I'm the first one in both to be completing this kind of education and doing this kind of stuff. And I don't know.
It's a huge deal.
Sorry, I kind
Pause
of
for a second and
went
say, wow.
on like this huge, I don't know where I was going with it. But
No,
I'm
you
sorry.
went somewhere. I think the first thing I want to say is we join you in honoring your dad. Yeah.
100%.
We join you in honoring him. And what I think is so important, thank you so much for sharing what you shared. And it's important because generally speaking, I feel like as an instructor, when we talk about truth and reconciliation, it's like this thing. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah, truth and reconciliation. But to personalize it with a story like this and demonstrate what harm came out of the residential schools and how families are still negotiating that and carrying that weight till this day is important for all of us learners, students, and so whatever, we're all learners on this highway of life. And it's important for us to hear stories like this and personalize it and recognize the web of pain and hurt that informed somebody as strong as you are to be with us here today and sharing some small part of it. And we take away his joy, his strength, his purpose, his determination, manifested here within you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I think we're going to pause here because I think this is a perfect spot naturally to end. I think nothing more needs to be said after that. Thank you so much, Ryanne, for coming, for sharing, for vesting. So grateful. This has been such a rich conversation and I've enjoyed every moment of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan, so much. And what we're going to do next is, after this pause, we're also going to speak to some sport organizations. We talked a little bit about our calls to action specific to sport. So we're going to speak to our friends at Ottawa Sport and Entertainment Group and Nova Scotia Hockey. And then we're going to come back and have another episode where the three of us then unpack what we hear about how these sport organizations are moving towards answering the call. So thank you, Ryan. That was transformative, I can call it. And Kay, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
And thank you both for providing this space for me. I really appreciate it.
Yay.
Thank you for listening to this special 4-part series on truth and reconciliation, a collaboration between the podcast Eve Intersected and the Podcast Learning Network at Brock University's Faculty of Humanities.
I'm your co-host, Kay.
And I'm your co-host, Shannon.
And I'm your guest, Ryan.
I'm producer, Allison.
And I'm audio producer, Andrew Camacho. Please check the show notes for links mentioned in each episode, and don't forget to visit our YouTube page where you can find each episode with subtitles at youtube.com/eveintersected. Our theme music is Unstoppable Dance Show by Nexus Sound Studio and Your Black Hoodie by White Records. These tracks are used under Creative Commons Zero license from pixabay.com.